My name is Sarah Chen, and I never thought a simple family dinner would change everything. It was a crisp October evening in Portland, Oregon, when my phone buzzed with a text from my Aunt Linda. The autumn leaves were already painting the streets in brilliant oranges and reds, creating that picture-perfect Pacific Northwest scene that had drawn me to this city 7 years ago. I was sitting in my downtown loft, reviewing quarterly reports on my MacBook when the message came through. The apartment was quiet, except for the gentle hum of traffic from the street below and the occasional sound of the Max train rumbling past. My space had changed dramatically over the past year. Gone was the cramped studio in southeast Portland with its single window and perpetually broken heater. Now I lived in a converted warehouse in the Pearl District, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the city I'd grown to love. "Sarah, honey, we're having a family gathering this Saturday for your cousin Derek's promotion. You have to come. It's been too long since we've all been together. Derek just got promoted to senior director at Nike. Can you believe it? We're so proud. Anyway, 6 p.m. at our place. Don't you dare say no." I stared at the screen for a long moment, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. The last family gathering I'd attended was 3 years ago, right after I'd left my corporate job at Intel to pursue what everyone called my pipe dream. Back then, I was just another unemployed millennial living off savings, trying to build something from nothing in my cramped studio apartment that smelled permanently of the Thai restaurant downstairs. The memory was still vivid, sitting around that same dining room table while relatives asked probing questions about my career plans and offered unsolicited advice about getting back into the real world. Derek had been particularly vocal that night, fresh off his MBA from Stanford and his entry-level position at Nike. He'd spent most of dinner explaining why startups were statistically destined to fail and suggesting I consider more stable opportunities. Now things were different, very different, but they didn't know that yet. I walked to my kitchen, a sleek space with granite countertops and stainless steel appliances that would have seemed impossibly luxurious 3 years ago, and made myself a cup of coffee using beans from Stumptown, Portland's famous local roaster. The ritual was soothing, familiar. Some things hadn't changed, even as my life had transformed completely. I typed back, "I'll be there, Aunt Linda, looking forward to it." The truth was, I wasn't looking forward to it at all. Family gatherings in the Chen household were notorious for one thing: the comparison game. Who was making the most money? Who had the best job? Who was living up to the family's high expectations of success? It was a tradition that stretched back to my grandparents' generation. Immigrants from Taiwan who had built successful lives in America through sheer determination and an unshakable belief that their children and grandchildren should always strive for more. Derek, my cousin who was 2 years younger than my 28 years, had always been the golden child. Perfect grades at Oregon State, MBA from Stanford, 6-figure salary at Nike's headquarters right here in Portland, the works. He lived in a beautiful house in Lake Oswego, drove a BMW, and posted regularly on social media about his latest achievements and acquisitions. Meanwhile, I had been the family disappointment, the one who'd thrown away a perfectly good engineering career at Intel to chase dreams that nobody understood. The one who'd stopped coming to family gatherings because I was tired of explaining why I didn't have a traditional job, why I was living in a studio apartment, why I hadn't followed the prescribed path to success. I closed my laptop and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows that dominated my living space. The city lights were beginning to twinkle as evening settled over Portland. I could see the Willamette River snaking through the urban landscape, the bridges connecting East and West Portland like delicate threads of light. In the distance, Mount Hood rose majestically against the darkening sky, its snow-capped peak catching the last rays of sunlight. Portland at night always reminded me why I loved this city. It was a place where dreamers could still make it, where innovation thrived alongside artisanal coffee shops and food trucks, where people valued authenticity over appearances. It was a city that had embraced me when I was nobody and had given me the space to become somebody. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. The caller ID showed Marcus Thompson, my business partner and CTO. "Hey, Sarah, just wanted to confirm, the TechCrunch article goes live Monday morning at 9 a.m. Pacific, right? Our PR team wants to make sure we're ready for the influx of interviews and media requests." I smiled, running my hand through my shoulder-length black hair. "Yes, Monday morning. And Marcus, Make sure the entire team is prepared. This is going to change everything for all of us." "I still can't believe it sometimes," Marcus chuckled, his voice carrying the exhaustion of someone who'd been working 18-hour days for the past month. "Remember when we were coding in your old apartment, living off ramen noodles and hope? Remember that night when your heater broke in January and we had to debug the algorithm while wearing winter coats?" "Those were good times," I said, and I meant it. "But these are better times." Marcus had been my roommate at Oregon State before we'd both ended up in Portland's tech scene. He was brilliant, the kind of programmer who could see solutions that others missed, who could write elegant code that solved complex problems with surprising simplicity. When I'd decided to leave Intel, he'd been the first person I'd called. We'd spent 3 months just talking through ideas before we'd landed on the concept that would become Flowtech Solutions. "Have you told your family yet?" Marcus asked. "I know you've been keeping everything under wraps." "Not yet, but I'm going to a family dinner on Saturday. It might be time." "Your cousin Derek's going to flip," Marcus said with obvious amusement. "Didn't he suggest you apply for an entry-level IT position at Nike last year?" "Customer support, actually. But who's counting?" After hanging up, I walked to my home office, a space that occupied what had once been a bedroom in the converted warehouse. Awards and framed articles lined the walls. Portland Business Journal's 40 Under 40, Oregon Entrepreneur of the Year finalist, rising stars in Pacific Northwest tech. But tucked away in my desk drawer was something I'd been carrying around for months, waiting for the right moment to reveal it. My CEO identification badge. Not just any CEO badge, but the badge that represented 3 years of 18-hour days, failed prototypes, rejected investor pitches, and more cups of Stumptown coffee than any human should reasonably consume. The badge that represented Flowtech Solutions, the AI-powered logistics company that Marcus and I had built from absolutely nothing. No family money, no trust fund, no safety net, except our own determination and a rapidly dwindling savings account. The company that, as of last week, was valued at $47 million. The company that had just been acquired by Amazon for a sum that would make Derek's Nike salary look like pocket change. But nobody in my family knew. I'd been incredibly private about my work, partly out of superstition. I didn't want to jinx anything, and partly because I knew how my family operated. If they'd known I was struggling to build a startup, the concerned phone calls and unsolicited advice would have been overwhelming. My mom would have worried herself sick, calling every few days to make sure I was eating properly and paying my bills. My dad would have started emailing me job listings from the University of Oregon, where he worked in the engineering department. If they'd known I was succeeding, the requests for loans and investment opportunities would have been equally overwhelming. Suddenly, every family member would have a brilliant business idea that just needed a little funding to get off the ground. So I'd stayed quiet, even when my mom asked during our monthly phone calls if I was still doing that computer thing. Even when relatives at weddings and funerals asked what I did for work, and I gave vague answers about consulting and tech projects. Even when Derek would make passive-aggressive comments on social media about people who talked a big game but never delivered results. The secrecy had been difficult, but it had also been liberating. It had allowed me to focus entirely on building something meaningful without the pressure of family expectations or the distraction of having to explain every setback and small victory along the way. I spent Friday preparing, not by picking out an outfit or rehearsing what I'd say, but by reviewing our company's journey. I pulled out the folder where I kept printed copies of our major milestones: the first client contract, the Series A funding announcement, the patent applications, the acquisition term sheet that had arrived just last week. 3 years ago, Marcus and I had been sitting in my tiny apartment, sketching algorithms on a whiteboard we'd bought at Goodwill. We'd identified a problem that was costing e-commerce companies billions of dollars annually: inefficient logistics. Packages were sitting in warehouses for days. Delivery routes were optimized by humans who couldn't possibly process all the relevant variables. And customer satisfaction was suffering because orders were taking too long to reach their destinations. Our solution was elegant in its simplicity: artificial intelligence that could analyze thousands of variables in real time to optimize every aspect of the fulfillment process. Not just delivery routes, but warehouse organization, inventory placement, seasonal demand prediction, even weather patterns that might affect shipping times. The first year had been brutal. We'd lived off our savings while we built the initial prototype, working from coffee shops around Portland because my apartment was too small for 2 people and all our equipment. We'd approached dozens of potential clients, only to be told that our solution was interesting but unproven, or that they were happy with their current systems. Our breakthrough had come in year 2, when REI, the outdoor gear company headquartered right here in the Pacific Northwest, agreed to let us run a pilot program in one of their distribution centers. Within 3 months, we'd reduced their shipping times by 23% and cut their logistics costs by 18%. Word spread quickly in the tight-knit world of e-commerce logistics. By year 3, we had clients across the country. Major retailers, fashion brands, electronics companies, all using our software to optimize their operations and save millions of dollars annually. We'd raised $12 million in Series A funding, hired a team of 15 brilliant engineers and data scientists, and moved into a proper office space in Portland's Silicon Forest. And then Amazon had called. Not to use our services, but to buy our company outright. They'd been developing similar technology internally, but our approach was more advanced, more scalable. The acquisition would save them years of development time and give them a competitive advantage in the increasingly important world of rapid delivery. The negotiations had taken months, but last week we'd finally signed the papers. $47 million with additional performance bonuses that could push the total even higher. Marcus and I each owned 40% of the company, with the remaining 20% distributed among our employees and early investors. I was about to become very, very wealthy. But more importantly, I was about to validate 3 years of people telling me I was wasting my time, throwing away my career, chasing an impossible dream. Saturday couldn't come fast enough, and at the same time, I was dreading it. I spent Saturday morning at Powell's Books, Portland's famous independent bookstore that occupied an entire city block downtown. It was my favorite place to think, to prepare mentally for challenging situations. I browsed the business section, reading about other entrepreneurs who'd faced doubt and criticism before achieving success. Stories that reminded me that what I'd accomplished wasn't just luck, it was the result of persistence, intelligence, and an unwillingness to accept that the status quo was the best we could do. The rain started falling as I walked back to my apartment, a typical Portland drizzle that made the city lights blur into watercolor streaks. I made myself a cup of tea and settled in for the afternoon, the CEO badge sitting on my coffee table like a small rectangular promise of tomorrow's revelations. In a few hours, I would walk into that familiar dining room and sit at that familiar table with those familiar faces. But for the first time in 3 years, I wouldn't be the family disappointment. I wouldn't be the cautionary tale about what happens when you abandon security for dreams. I would be proof that sometimes, just sometimes, the impossible becomes inevitable. Saturday arrived with the kind of persistent Oregon drizzle that makes you appreciate indoor gatherings. The morning sky was a canvas of gray clouds that seemed to stretch endlessly, typical for October in the Pacific Northwest. I'd woken up early, unable to sleep past 6 a.m., despite the fact that I'd been exhausted from a week of acquisition meetings and legal paperwork. I spent the morning at my favorite coffee shop in the Pearl District, a small place called Barista that served coffee so good it had developed a cult following among Portland's tech workers. The owner, a woman named Jessica who'd moved here from San Francisco, knew my usual order, double-shot cortado with oat milk, and we'd developed the kind of casual friendship that makes a city feel like home. "You seem different today," Jessica observed as she handed me my coffee. "Good different. Like you're carrying some kind of secret." I smiled, taking a sip of the perfectly crafted drink. "Maybe I am." "Well, whatever it is, it suits you. You look like someone who just won the lottery." If she only knew, I thought. I'd chosen my outfit carefully for the family dinner. Nothing too flashy, but nice enough to show that I wasn't struggling. Dark jeans that actually fit properly. A cashmere sweater in deep forest green that I'd bought myself after our first major client had signed on. And the leather jacket that had become my signature piece. It was sophisticated but approachable. Successful but not ostentatious. In my purse, tucked safely in a small interior pocket, was the badge. I'd also brought printed copies of the TechCrunch article that would go live Monday morning, just in case anyone wanted to see more details. Aunt Linda and Uncle Robert lived in Lake Oswego, one of Portland's more affluent suburbs, about 20 minutes south of downtown. Their house was a sprawling, craftsman-style home built in the 1920s with a perfectly manicured garden that Linda tended with obsessive care. Even in October, with most of the flowers gone dormant for winter, the landscape somehow looked pristine and welcoming. I parked my Honda Civic. Yes, I still drove the same reliable car I'd bought in college, behind Derek's BMW, and took a moment to collect myself. Through the large front windows, I could see warm light spilling out and the silhouettes of family members already gathered in the living room. The scene looked like something from a Norman Rockwell painting, the perfect American family celebrating another milestone in their ongoing pursuit of success and happiness. There was Derek, holding court as usual in front of the fireplace, probably regaling everyone with stories from Nike headquarters. My parents had driven up from Eugene that morning. I could see my mom's animated gestures as she spoke to my Uncle Robert, her hands moving expressively the way they always did when she was excited about something. Various cousins, aunts, and family friends filled the comfortable space with the warm chaos that characterized Chen family gatherings. Before I could ring the doorbell, the door swung open. "Sarah!" Aunt Linda's voice was warm and welcoming as she pulled me into one of her signature hugs, the kind that lasted just a little too long and somehow made you feel both loved and slightly overwhelmed. "You look absolutely wonderful, honey. Come in, come in. Everyone's been asking about you." I'll bet they have, I thought, but smiled and followed her inside. The house smelled exactly as I remembered. Linda's famous pot roast mingling with the vanilla candles she always lit for special occasions, and that underlying scent of the eucalyptus arrangement she kept on the entry table. The living room was exactly as it had been for the past 15 years. Family photos covering every available surface, comfortable furniture arranged in a way that encouraged conversation, and that massive stone fireplace that made everything feel cozy and inviting. "Look who's here!" Linda announced to the room, and suddenly I was the center of attention. My mom rushed over first, wrapping me in one of those maternal hugs that somehow makes everything feel better and more complicated at the same time. At 53, she still had the energy and enthusiasm of someone half her age, especially when it came to her children. "Sarah, sweetheart, you're so thin. Are you eating enough? Are you taking care of yourself? You know you can always come home if you need to, right?" "I'm fine, Mom. Really good, actually. Better than I've been in a long time." My dad approached more cautiously, the way he always did at social gatherings. He was more comfortable in his engineering lab at the University of Oregon than in crowds, but his smile was genuine as he hugged me. "Good to see you, kiddo. Your mom's been worried about you." "Dad, I'm 28. You can stop calling me kiddo." "Not gonna happen," he said with a grin. Derek approached with his characteristic confident smile, extending his hand for what I knew would be an overly firm handshake. He looked exactly like what central casting would order for successful young executive. Perfectly styled hair that probably required more daily maintenance than my entire beauty routine, expensive watch that caught the light whenever he gestured, and a shirt that probably cost more than most people's weekly grocery bill. "Sarah, great to see you, cuz. Congratulations on whatever you're doing these days," Derek said, his tone suggesting he had no idea what I was doing, but was being polite anyway. "Thanks," I replied, not bothering to elaborate. "Congratulations on your promotion. Nike's treating you well?" "Oh, you know how it is," Derek said, with the kind of false modesty that somehow managed to sound even more arrogant than outright bragging. "Just another step up the corporate ladder. Senior Director of Digital Marketing now. The money's pretty ridiculous, honestly. But someone's got to do it, right?" I nodded politely, noticing how he'd managed to work his title and a reference to his salary into the conversation within 30 seconds. Some things never changed. Derek had always been the type to drop subtle hints about his success, making sure everyone knew exactly how well he was doing without seeming like he was showing off. The next hour passed in a blur of family catch-up that felt both familiar and surreal. I deflected questions about my work with vague references to consulting and tech projects, the same lines I'd been using for 3 years. My cousin Jennifer, who worked as a nurse at OHSU, told me about her recent engagement to a doctor she'd met at the hospital. My Uncle Robert, recently retired from his career as an accountant, shared stories about his new hobby of golf and complained good-naturedly about how much harder the game was than it looked on television. My parents updated everyone on their respective careers. Dad's research work in the University of Oregon's engineering department, where he was developing new materials for renewable energy applications, and Mom's interior design business, which had been thriving as Portland's real estate market continued to boom. Throughout it all, I felt Derek's eyes on me. He'd always been competitive, even as kids during family vacations and holiday gatherings, and I could tell he was trying to figure out my angle. In his mind, there was no way his unemployed, startup-dreaming cousin could be doing better than Nike's newest senior director. He kept making subtle comments designed to probe my situation, asking about my living situation, my travel plans, whether I was still doing the startup thing. Dinner was announced, and we all moved to the dining room. Linda had outdone herself. Pot roast that fell apart at the touch of a fork, roasted vegetables that somehow managed to be both healthy and indulgent, fresh bread that filled the room with its warm, yeasty aroma. The table was set with her good china, the kind that only came out for special occasions, and each place setting included a small card with our names written in Linda's careful, cursive handwriting. The conversation flowed as easily as the wine Uncle Robert had been saving for a special occasion. We covered everything from the Portland Trail Blazers prospects for the upcoming basketball season to the best new restaurants that had opened downtown in the past year. My cousin Jennifer was planning a destination wedding in Costa Rica, and everyone had opinions about the logistics and expense. Uncle Robert was considering buying a vacation home on the Oregon coast, and my parents were debating whether to remodel their kitchen or finally take that trip to Italy they'd been talking about for years. I was actually starting to relax, enjoying the familiar rhythm of family conversation, when Derek decided to make his move. "So, Sarah," he said, cutting into his pot roast with theatrical precision, his voice carrying just enough volume to command the table's attention. "Mom mentioned you're still doing the startup thing. How's that working out for you?" The table quieted slightly, that subtle shift that happens when everyone senses drama brewing but doesn't want to be obvious about listening. Forks paused mid-bite. Conversations at the other end of the table faded, and I could feel multiple sets of eyes turning toward me. "It's going well," I said simply, taking a sip of wine and keeping my voice neutral. Derek chuckled, the sound carrying just enough condescension to make my jaw tighten involuntarily. "Come on, cuz. We're all family here. You can be honest with us. I know how tough the startup world is. Most of them fail, right? What's the statistic? Like 90% crash and burn within the first few years?" I felt my parents tense across the table. My dad started to say something, probably to change the subject, but Derek was clearly on a roll and wasn't going to be deterred. "I mean, don't get me wrong, I admire the hustle. I really do. It takes guts to chase a dream like that. But at some point, you've got to be realistic about things, right? Maybe it's time to think about getting back into the corporate world. I could probably put in a word at Nike if you're interested. We're always looking for good people in our IT support department." The patronizing tone was unmistakable now. This wasn't friendly concern or family looking out for family. This was Derek establishing dominance, reminding everyone at the table who the successful one was, who had made the smart choices, who was living the American dream the right way. IT support department. Not even a real technology role, just basic corporate customer service. The kind of job that would represent a massive step backward from my previous position at Intel, let alone from what I was actually doing now. "That's very generous of you, Derek," I said evenly, my voice giving nothing away. "I just worry, you know?" Derek continued, warming to his theme like a politician who'd found his favorite talking point. "You're pushing 30 now, and the job market isn't getting any younger. Plus, let's be honest, the startup thing is basically unemployment with better branding, right?" A few uncomfortable laughs around the table. My mom's face had gone tight with barely contained irritation, and I could see my dad's hands clenching slightly around his fork. Uncle Robert looked like he wanted to change the subject, but Derek was clearly enjoying himself too much to stop. "Derek," my mom started, her voice carrying that warning tone that every member of our family recognized, but I held up a gentle hand. "It's okay, Mom." I turned back to Derek, keeping my voice calm and friendly, as if we were discussing the weather. "You're absolutely right that most startups fail. The statistics are pretty brutal. Some studies say 90% don't make it past the first few years." Derek nodded, clearly pleased that I was agreeing with him, that I was acknowledging the wisdom of his perspective. "Exactly. So why not cut your losses now while you still can? Get back into the real world, start making some real money again. I mean, what are you even living on right now anyway?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Around the table, I could see various family members shifting uncomfortably in their chairs. This had gone from gentle ribbing to something much more pointed, much more personal. Even Derek seemed to realize he might have crossed a line, but he was too committed to his performance to back down now. I set down my fork and reached for my purse, which I'd placed on the floor beside my chair. "Actually, Derek, since you're so interested in my employment status and financial situation," I said, pulling out the small leather folder I'd been carrying all evening, "maybe this will answer your questions." I opened the folder with deliberate care, as if I were handling something precious, and placed my CEO identification badge on the table, right next to the salt and pepper shakers where everyone could see it clearly. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway and the sound of rain beginning to fall against the dining room windows. The badge sat on Linda's pristine white tablecloth like a small nuclear bomb, completely transforming the atmosphere in the room. It was a simple thing, really. Just a rectangular piece of metal and plastic, about the size of a credit card, with my professional headshot, name and title printed in clean corporate typography. Sarah Chen, Chief Executive Officer, Flowtech Solutions. Derek's fork stopped halfway to his mouth, a piece of perfectly cooked pot roast dangling forgotten as he stared at the badge. His confident expression had been replaced by something between confusion and disbelief. Around the table, I could see various family members leaning forward, squinting to read the small text, their wine glasses forgotten as they tried to process what they were seeing. "Flowtech Solutions," my Uncle Robert read aloud, his voice filled with curiosity rather than Derek's earlier condescension. That's your company, Sarah. Co-founded it 3 years ago with my business partner Marcus Thompson," I said, taking another sip of wine as if I hadn't just dropped a conversational bombshell that would reshape every relationship at this table. "We specialize in AI-powered logistics optimization for e-commerce companies." The words hung in the air, technical and impressive sounding, but still abstract enough that I could see people trying to translate them into something they could understand. My mom blinked several times, as if trying to process this information and reconcile it with 3 years of worrying about my career prospects. "Honey, you never said you were a CEO." "Well, it wasn't official for the first 2 years, I explained, beginning to enjoy the rapt attention of my audience. "We were bootstrapping the company, trying to prove the concept, build a client base. You know how it is with startups. You wear a lot of hats until you can afford to hire people to wear them for you. For the first year, I was CEO, CFO, head of sales, customer service rep, and office manager all at the same time." Derek had recovered enough to speak, though his voice had lost its earlier confidence and carried a slight tremor that suggested he was beginning to realize he'd made a significant miscalculation. "Okay, so you have a title. But what does that actually mean? I mean, anyone can print up a business card and call themselves a CEO." I nodded thoughtfully, as if considering his point seriously. "You're absolutely right, Derek. Titles are meaningless without substance. Any college student can incorporate a company online for a few $100s and give themselves whatever title they want." I pulled out my phone and opened the TechCrunch app, navigating to the draft article that would go live Monday morning. This might provide some context. I handed the phone to Derek, watching his face carefully as he read the headline that would soon be seen by millions of people in the tech industry. Amazon acquires Portland-based Flowtech Solutions for $47 million in strategic AI move. The color drained from Derek's face as he read, his eyes scanning the article with increasing amazement. The opening paragraph laid out the basic facts. Flowtech Solutions, a 3-year-old artificial intelligence company focused on logistics optimization, had been acquired by Amazon Web Services for $47 million, with additional performance incentives that could push the total value above $50 million. Around the table, curious murmurs started as family members tried to see what had rendered the normally talkative Derek completely speechless. My cousin Jennifer craned her neck, trying to read the phone screen. My parents exchanged glances that conveyed years of married communication, surprise, pride, and perhaps a touch of hurt that I hadn't shared this journey with them. "Derek?" Aunt Linda asked, her voice carrying the slightly impatient tone of someone who'd been left out of an important conversation. "What does it say?" Derek cleared his throat. His earlier bravado completely evaporated like morning fog in the Portland sun. It's an article about Sarah's company being acquired by Amazon for... He paused, clearly having trouble with the number, as if saying it out loud would make it somehow more real and more impossible at the same time. $47 million. The silence that followed was different from the first one. Where the earlier quiet had been shocked, this one was stunned. The kind of silence that follows truly life-changing news. I could practically hear the mental calculations happening around the table as everyone tried to figure out what a $47 million acquisition meant for someone who owned a significant portion of the company being acquired. My dad was the first to break the silence, using my full name the way he had when I was in trouble as a child, though his tone suggested I was in a very different kind of trouble now. "Sarah Elizabeth Chen, are you telling us you're a millionaire?" "Well," I said, cutting another piece of Linda's excellent pot roast as if we were discussing weekend plans rather than a life-changing financial windfall. "The deal isn't finalized until Monday morning, and there are taxes and legal fees and all sorts of complications that will eat into the final number. But yes, Dad, I'm going to be just fine financially." The understatement was intentional. Marcus and I each owned 40% of Flowtech Solutions, which meant my share of the acquisition would be just under $19 million before taxes. Even after the government took its substantial cut, I would be wealthy enough to never work again if I chose not to. My cousin Jennifer laughed, not maliciously, but with genuine amazement and perhaps a touch of hysteria. "This is absolutely insane." "Sarah, why didn't you tell us? We've been worried about you for 3 years. Mom kept saying she was afraid you were living on ramen noodles and couldn't afford to go to the doctor." "That's exactly why I didn't tell you," I said gently, looking around the table at faces that ranged from amazed to hurt to proud, "because you would have worried even more. And honestly, for most of those 3 years, there really wasn't much to tell. We were 2 people working out of my tiny apartment, coding 18-hour days, eating more ramen than any human should consume, and hoping we could make rent every month." I took a sip of wine, gathering my thoughts. This was the part of the story that mattered more than the money, the part that explained why I'd kept quiet for so long. "The thing about startups," I continued, "is that they're absolutely terrifying right up until the moment they're not. For every success story you hear about, the Facebooks and Googles and Amazons, there are literally thousands of failures. Companies that burn through their funding and disappear without anyone ever hearing about them. People who sacrifice years of their lives and their financial security chasing dreams that never materialize." I looked around the table, making eye contact with each family member. I didn't want to get everyone's hopes up, including my own. I didn't want to have to explain every setback, every rejection, every month when we barely scraped together enough money to keep the lights on. And I definitely didn't want to become a cautionary tale if things didn't work out. Uncle Robert leaned back in his chair, shaking his head in wonder. "AI logistics optimization. I have to admit, Sarah, I have absolutely no idea what that means, but it sounds incredibly impressive." I smiled, realizing that this was my chance to help my family understand not just what I'd accomplished, but why it mattered. "It's actually pretty simple in concept, Uncle Robert. Think about how Amazon can get you a package in 2 days, or sometimes even the same day you order it. Behind the scenes, there's an incredible amount of complex mathematics and artificial intelligence working to make that happen efficiently and cost-effectively." I gestured with my hands, trying to illustrate the invisible complexity of modern commerce. Every time you order something online, dozens of decisions have to be made instantly. Which warehouse has the item? What's the most efficient route for delivery? Should multiple items be packed together or separately? How do weather patterns affect shipping times? What about seasonal demand fluctuations, traffic patterns, fuel costs? The table was listening intently now, and I could see understanding beginning to dawn on several faces. Traditional logistics companies handle these decisions with human planners and basic computer systems, I continued. It works, but it's not optimal. Our artificial intelligence can analyze thousands of variables simultaneously and make better decisions faster than any human could. The result is packages that arrive sooner, shipping costs that are lower, and customers who are happier. "And you built the software that does this?" my mom asked, pride creeping into her voice. "Marcus and I built it together. He handles the technical architecture. He's absolutely brilliant at the machine learning algorithms that make everything work. I handle the business side, Client relationships, strategic planning, operations, making sure we're solving real problems that companies actually want to pay for. I paused, remembering those early days when everything seemed impossible. It took us 2 years to build a working prototype that could handle real-world complexity. Another year to get our first major client and prove that the system actually worked in practice. Derek had been silent throughout this exchange, still staring at my phone as if the article might change if he looked at it long enough. Finally, he looked up, his voice much quieter than it had been earlier. "Who was your first major client?" "REI," I said, and I saw recognition flash across several faces around the table. Everyone knew REI. The outdoor gear company was a Pacific Northwest institution, beloved by anyone who'd ever hiked or camped, or simply appreciated quality gear. They were having issues with their distribution center efficiency during peak seasons. You know, the run-up to Christmas, back-to-school season, summer camping gear rush. Orders were taking too long to process, customers were getting frustrated, and they were spending a fortune on rush shipping to meet their delivery promises. I could see Derek processing this information, probably running calculations in his head about what a client like REI might pay for logistics optimization. Our software helped them reduce shipping times by 23% and cut logistics costs by 18% during their first peak season with us. For a company REI's size, that translates to millions of dollars in savings and significantly improved customer satisfaction. That's actually really impressive, Derek admitted quietly, and I could hear genuine respect in his voice for the first time all evening. "Thank you. And you're right that it was impressive. Impressive enough that word spread incredibly quickly in the e-commerce world. From REI, we got referrals to other outdoor gear companies, then some fashion retailers who were struggling with seasonal inventory, then electronics companies dealing with product launch logistics. In the tech world, word spreads fast when you can help companies save millions of dollars." I noticed that Derek was still holding my phone, scrolling through the article with increasing fascination. The article mentions that Amazon had been developing similar technology internally. Why did they decide to acquire you instead of just building their own solution? It was a smart question, the kind that showed Derek's business mind was engaging with the reality of what I'd accomplished rather than dismissing it out of hand. 2 reasons, I said, appreciating that the conversation had shifted from skepticism to genuine curiosity. First, we were about 2 years ahead of where their internal team was. In the tech world, especially with AI development, 2 years might as well be a decade. They could have eventually built something similar, but by the time they did, we would have been even further ahead. I paused to take another bite of Linda's pot roast, which was getting cold, but still tasted incredible. Second, and this is probably more important, our approach was fundamentally different from theirs. Amazon's internal team was focused on optimizing their own massive logistics network. We built our system to work with any company, any size, any type of product. That flexibility made our solution much more valuable, both for Amazon's existing business and for the logistics services they want to sell to other companies. Aunt Linda had been unusually quiet throughout this exchange, but now she spoke up with the practical concern that had made her the family's unofficial financial advisor. "Sarah, honey, I have to ask, if you've been so successful, why do you still drive that old Honda Civic? Why are you wearing jeans to a family dinner instead of some fancy designer outfit? Why haven't we seen any signs of this success?" I laughed, and for the first time all evening, it felt completely natural and unstrained. "Because I'm still me, Aunt Linda. Having money doesn't change who you are, or at least it shouldn't. I bought a nicer apartment because I needed the space for a proper home office and to host client meetings. But I still shop at Target, and I still think spending $300 on jeans is ridiculous." I gestured to my sweater. "This is cashmere, and it was definitely more expensive than what I used to buy, but I got it at Nordstrom Rack during a sale. The leather jacket was my one big splurge after we signed our first major client, but I've worn it probably 300 times since then. Plus," I added, "until this week, everything was theoretical. The company was valuable on paper, but I couldn't exactly pay rent with equity shares. Marcus and I have been paying ourselves modest salaries, enough to live comfortably, but nothing extravagant. We reinvested everything else back into the company, hiring better engineers, improving our technology, expanding our client base." My cousin Jennifer raised her wine glass, her earlier amazement settling into genuine happiness for my success. I think a toast is in order. To Sarah, for proving that following your dreams actually can pay off, and for being smart enough to keep quiet about it until you knew it was real. And for keeping us humble, Derek added, though his smile was genuine now, rather than condescending. There was something different in his expression. Respect, certainly, but also a kind of wistful recognition that maybe he'd been too quick to dismiss paths that didn't look like his own. I have to apologize, cuz I was being a complete ass earlier. I thought I was looking out for you, but really, I was just being judgmental about choices I didn't understand. I looked at Derek, seeing something in his face I'd never seen before. Genuine humility mixed with what might have been regret. Derek, you don't need to apologize. You were looking out for me in your own way. And honestly, you weren't wrong about the statistics. Most startups do fail. I was incredibly lucky, but I was also incredibly stubborn, and I had a brilliant partner who could turn crazy ideas into working code. Lucky and stubborn, Uncle Robert mused, raising his own glass. Sounds like a Chen family trait if I ever heard one. The conversation continued for another hour, but the entire dynamic had shifted. Instead of the subtle competition that usually characterized Chen family gatherings, there was genuine curiosity and excitement. My cousins asked about the technical aspects of what we'd built, wanting to understand how artificial intelligence could actually make decisions about shipping routes and warehouse organization. My parents wanted to know about the acquisition process, how negotiations worked, what it was like to sell a company you'd built from nothing. But it was Derek's questions that surprised me the most. Gone was the earlier condescension, replaced by genuine interest in the business aspects of what we'd accomplished. He asked about our marketing strategy, our client acquisition process, how we'd managed cash flow during the early days when revenue was unpredictable. What made Amazon want to acquire you specifically? He asked, as we helped clear the dinner dishes, his tone now that of one professional speaking to another. Strategic fit, I explained, appreciating that he was asking substantive questions rather than just gawking at the dollar amounts. Amazon's core business is logistics, moving products efficiently from warehouses to customers. But they also want to sell logistics services to other companies. Our technology gives them a significant competitive advantage in both areas. And you're staying on after the acquisition? For now. I've got a 3-year contract to help integrate our technology with their existing systems and to lead the team that will adapt our solution for Amazon's specific needs. After that, we'll see. I might start something new, or I might take some time to figure out what I really want to do with the rest of my life. Derek nodded thoughtfully, and I could see the wheels turning in his head. You know, I've been thinking about leaving Nike, maybe trying the startup thing myself. I looked at him carefully, remembering his earlier dismissal of entrepreneurship as unemployment with better branding. It's not easy, Derek, and it's definitely not glamorous. You'd be giving up a steady paycheck, stock options, excellent benefits, career security, all for something that might turn out to be nothing. But it might turn out to be something, he said quietly, and I heard something in his voice I'd never heard before. Uncertainty, vulnerability, maybe even a touch of envy for the path I'd chosen. It might, I agreed, but make sure you're doing it for the right reasons. Don't chase the money or the excitement of calling yourself an entrepreneur. Don't do it because you're trying to prove something to other people. Chase a problem you're genuinely passionate about solving, something that keeps you up at night because you can't stop thinking about better ways to do it. As the evening wound down and family members started saying their goodbyes, I found myself feeling something I hadn't expected. Gratitude for Derek's earlier condescension. His mocking questions had given me the perfect setup to share news I'd been carrying alone for months, and more importantly, they'd forced me to articulate why this journey had been worth the risk and uncertainty. My parents were the last to leave, lingering in the entryway while Linda bustled around collecting coats and purses. Sarah, my mom said, her voice carrying that particular tone that meant she had something important to say. Your father and I want you to know how proud we are, not just of your success, but of how you've handled it. The fact that you kept working, kept living modestly, kept focused on building something meaningful rather than just cashing in, that tells us we raised you right. My dad nodded, his engineer's mind still processing the technical aspects of what I'd described. The AI logistics optimization. It's similar to some of the efficiency algorithms we use in renewable energy systems. I'd love to understand more about how you're handling the machine learning component. I'll set up a call with Marcus, I promised. He'd love to talk shop with another engineer, especially one who understands complex systems optimization. As I drove back downtown through the quiet Saturday night streets of Lake Oswego, I reflected on how dramatically the evening had shifted. I'd walked into that house as the family disappointment, the cautionary tale about what happens when you abandon security for dreams. I was leaving as proof that sometimes, just sometimes, the impossible becomes inevitable. But more than that, I was leaving with a deeper understanding of my own journey. The 3 years of struggle and uncertainty hadn't just been about building a company or making money. They'd been about proving to myself that I could identify a problem, develop a solution, and execute that solution at a level that created real value for real people. The badge in my purse represented more than financial success. It represented the validation of every 18-hour day, every rejected pitch, every month when we weren't sure we could make payroll. It represented the decision to bet on myself when everyone else thought I was making a mistake. Tomorrow, the TechCrunch article would go live, and my private journey would become public. There would be interviews and congratulations and complications I couldn't yet imagine. But tonight, driving through the Portland streets I'd come to love, I felt nothing but gratitude for a city that had given 2 stubborn dreamers the space to build something meaningful. The rain had stopped by the time I left Aunt Linda's house, and the October night was crisp and clear. Portland's city lights sparkled in the distance as I drove back downtown, my mind replaying the evening's events. The CEO badge sat on my passenger seat, no longer a secret, but now a bridge between my old life and whatever came next. The drive through Lake Oswego's tree-lined streets gave me time to process what had just happened. For 3 years, I'd carried the weight of my family's concern and skepticism, always deflecting questions about my work, always feeling like I had to justify my choices. Tonight, all of that had changed in the span of a single dinner conversation. My phone had been buzzing with texts throughout the drive, and when I reached a red light, I glanced at the screen. Word was apparently spreading fast through the Chen family network. "Sarah, Mom just called and told us about Amazon." I'm literally screaming, "So proud of you." My cousin Lisa in San Francisco, who worked in marketing for a tech startup and would definitely understand the significance of a $47 million acquisition. "Little sister, you've been holding out on us. Dad says you're richer than all of us combined now. Remember me when you're buying your yacht." My brother Tom, currently finishing his residency at OHSU and true to form in his inability to take anything completely seriously. "Honey, Dad and I are so proud we can't stop talking about it. We always knew you were special, but this is beyond our wildest dreams. Can't wait to read the article Monday." Mom, probably staying up way past her usual bedtime to process everything that had happened. But it was the last text that made me smile the most. "Sarah, it's Derek. Thank you for not making me feel worse than I already did tonight. You handled my obnoxious comments with more class than I deserved. Would love to buy you coffee sometime and pick your brain about the startup world. Seriously this time, not as someone trying to talk you out of it. And congratulations, you've earned every bit of success coming your way." I pulled into the parking garage beneath my building and sat in my Honda Civic for a moment, processing the evening and Derek's unexpected transformation. 3 years ago, when I'd left my comfortable job at Intel to chase what everyone called a pipe dream, I'd imagined this moment of vindication countless times. In my fantasies, it had always been more dramatic, a grand gesture, a moment of triumph where I proved all the doubters wrong with a flourish of superiority. The reality had been better. It had been human. Derek's initial condescension hadn't made me angry. It had made me sad. Sad that we lived in a world where someone's worth was often measured solely by their job title and salary. Sad that family gatherings could become performance spaces where everyone competed to prove their success rather than simply celebrating each other's happiness. Sad that I'd felt the need to keep my journey secret, even from people who loved me unconditionally. But the evening had also revealed something beautiful. When the performance was stripped away, when the badges and titles and salaries were set aside, what remained was family. Imperfect, occasionally infuriating, but ultimately loving family who wanted the best for each other, even when they didn't understand each other's choices. I took the elevator up to my loft and immediately walked to my home office. The wall was covered with the artifacts of my journey. The first sketch Marcus and I had drawn of our software architecture on a napkin at a coffee shop in Southeast Portland, printed emails from early clients expressing amazement at the results we'd achieved, photos from team building events with the brilliant engineers and data scientists we'd hired, the incorporation papers for Flowtech solutions that had made everything official. But now I added something new, the dinner napkin from tonight, on which Uncle Robert had written CEO Sarah Chen and drawn a small crown during dessert. He'd slid it to me with a wink that had made me laugh out loud, breaking the tension that had lingered after Derek's earlier comments. My laptop chimed with an email notification. It was from Marcus, sent from his home in southeast Portland, where he was probably still awake, tinkering with code or reading research papers about the latest developments in machine learning. Sarah, just saw the family group chat explosion. Yes, somehow my mom got added to it and has been forwarding me screenshots. Sounds like the secret's finally out. How does it feel to finally be able to tell people what we've been working on for 3 years? I typed back, liberating and terrifying and weird, but mostly good. Derek actually apologized and asked if I'd mentor him on starting his own company. Marcus's response came quickly. Plot twist, think we're ready for what comes next? The PR team says we should expect at least 50 interview requests by Tuesday. I looked out my office window at the city we'd both chosen to call home. The city where we'd built something meaningful from nothing but an idea and stubborn determination. Portland's downtown was quieter now, most of the Saturday night revelers having moved indoors or headed home. But the city still hummed with that particular energy that had drawn me here 7 years ago. I think we're as ready as anyone can be for having their lives completely turned upside down, I typed back. The truth was, I had no idea what came next. The Amazon acquisition would change everything. Our technology would be integrated into systems used by millions of people every day. Our small team would become part of one of the world's largest companies. Our daily routines would shift from startup chaos to corporate structure. In 3 months, I'd go from being Sarah Chen, unknown startup founder working out of a converted warehouse, to Sarah Chen, the Portland entrepreneur who built and sold a $47 million AI company. The media attention alone would be overwhelming. TechCrunch was just the beginning. I'd already fielded preliminary inquiries from the Wall Street Journal, Forbes, and several local Portland publications. There would be speaking engagements, award ceremonies, invitations to serve on advisory boards and investment committees. But tonight had reminded me that the most important part of my identity wasn't the money or the recognition or even the technology we'd built. It was the built part itself. The 3 years of problems solved, obstacles overcome, and dreams made reality through nothing but hard work, intelligent risk-taking, and the unwavering belief that better solutions were always possible. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was my mom, calling from Eugene. Hi, honey. I know it's late, but I couldn't sleep. I keep thinking about tonight, about everything you told us. It was quite an evening, I agreed, settling into my favorite reading chair by the window. Sarah, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me. Were you ever really struggling? Were there times when we should have helped, when you needed us and didn't say anything because you were too proud or stubborn to ask? I considered the question carefully, thinking back to those early days when every month was a financial cliffhanger, when we'd eat ramen for weeks to save money for server costs, when I'd lie awake at night wondering if we were completely delusional to think we could compete with established companies that had hundreds of millions of dollars in resources. There were definitely scary moments, Mom. Times when we weren't sure we could make payroll for our first employees, or when a potential client would reject our proposal after months of courtship, and we'd wonder if we were completely wrong about what the market wanted. But I was never in real danger. I had savings from my Intel job, and I knew you and Dad would always be there if I really needed help. Then why didn't you tell us what you were working on? We would have been so excited for you, so supportive. We could have helped somehow. Because, I said, watching the city lights twinkle below while I tried to articulate something I'd never fully explained to anyone. I needed to know I could do it on my own. Not because I don't value your support, you know I do, but because I needed to prove something to myself. I needed to know that I could identify a real problem, develop a real solution, and execute that solution at a level that created genuine value. I paused, thinking about Derek's transformation from skeptic to aspiring entrepreneur in the space of a single evening. And because I knew that if I told you about every setback, every rejection, every moment of doubt, you'd worry yourself sick. You'd probably try to talk me into taking a safer path, not because you don't believe in me, but because you love me and want to protect me from failure and disappointment. Mom was quiet for a moment, and I could almost hear her processing this explanation, trying to understand the mindset that had driven me to choose uncertainty over security. You know, when you were little, you used to build these incredibly elaborate structures with your wooden blocks. Castles and bridges and towers that seemed to defy the laws of physics. And whenever your father or I tried to help, tried to suggest a more stable foundation or a different approach, you'd get this determined look on your face and say, "I can do it myself." I laughed, the memory coming back clearly. I remember those block towers. Most of them fell down eventually, but you always rebuilt them, Mom said softly, usually bigger and more ambitious than before. Your father and I used to joke that "I can do it myself" would be your epitaph someday. I guess some things don't change. No, Mom said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. They don't, and I'm grateful for that. Your stubbornness used to drive us absolutely crazy when you were younger, but it's also what made tonight possible. It's what gave you the courage to leave a safe job and chase something that seemed impossible to everyone else. After we hung up, I walked back to my window and looked out at Portland one more time. Somewhere out there, Marcus was probably still working, fine-tuning algorithms or preparing for the media circus that would begin Monday morning. Somewhere out there, Derek was perhaps Googling how to start a successful startup or questioning his own career choices for the first time in years. Somewhere out there, other dreamers were hunched over laptops in coffee shops and apartment bedrooms and converted warehouses, chasing their own impossible ideas with nothing but determination and the belief that better solutions were always possible. 3 years ago, I'd been one of those dreamers, working 18-hour days in a studio apartment that barely had room for 2 people and a whiteboard. Tonight, I was living proof that sometimes, just sometimes, the impossible becomes inevitable. But the journey wasn't ending. It was evolving. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new ways to apply the lessons I'd learned during those 3 years of uncertainty. The acquisition was just the beginning of whatever came next. I picked up the CEO badge from my coffee table and looked at it one more time. Tomorrow, it would probably be photographed for magazine articles and newspaper profiles. It would become a symbol of entrepreneurial success, a prop in the story of the Portland startup that made it big against all odds. But tonight, it was just a reminder of a simple truth that Derek's mocking question had crystallized. Success isn't about proving others wrong or validating your choices to skeptics. It's about proving yourself right. Right to take intelligent risks, right to chase solutions to problems that matter, right to believe that the world can be improved by the work you do and the value you create. I placed the badge back in my desk drawer, next to the incorporation papers and the printed email from our first client, and all the other artifacts of a journey that had seemed impossible when it began. Tomorrow would bring interviews and congratulations and complications I couldn't yet imagine. But tonight, I was just Sarah Chen, grateful for a family that loved me enough to worry about my choices and celebrate my successes in equal measure. Grateful for a business partner brilliant enough to turn crazy ideas into working code, and grateful for a city that had given 2 stubborn dreamers the space and support to build something meaningful. Outside my window, Portland settled into its typical autumn evening rhythm. A few late-night food carts serving the bar crowd, the MAX train carrying night shift workers home, the gentle hum of a city that never quite sleeps, but always dreams of better tomorrows. I made myself a cup of tea using leaves from a local Portland tea company and opened my laptop to write a blog post I'd been planning for months. Not about the acquisition or the financial success, but about the journey itself. About the lessons learned during the scary times, the importance of choosing the right co-founder, the value of staying humble and grounded, even when external validation makes it tempting to believe your own hype. As I started typing, I realized this story wasn't ending tonight. It was just beginning a new chapter. The badge in my drawer represented not just what I'd accomplished, but what was still possible. The problems I could solve, the teams I could build, the solutions I could create, all of it was still ahead of me. And for the first time in 3 years, instead of feeling anxious about an uncertain future, I was genuinely excited to find out what came next. 3 years ago, Derek had dismissed my dreams as unemployment with better branding. Tonight, he'd asked me to mentor him as he considered chasing dreams of his own. The transformation wasn't just in our circumstances. It was in our understanding of what was possible when you combined intelligence, persistence, and the courage to bet on yourself. I typed the first line of my blog post. 3 years ago, I left a comfortable job to chase what everyone called an impossible dream. Tonight, I learned that the most important part of achieving the impossible isn't proving others wrong. It's proving yourself right. Outside, Portland continued its eternal dance of ambition and creativity, of dreamers and builders, of people crazy enough to think they could change the world and stubborn enough to actually try. I was proud to call it home.